Some of you may have heard of Mark Driscoll. Now, it's going to sound like I'm picking on him today, and I'm not really picking on him. I kind of like Mark Driscoll, but there's Mark Driscoll. That's an older picture. He's a little bit older now, has a little bit less hair, but kind of like somebody else. But Mark Driscoll founded Mars Hill Church in Seattle, Washington in 1996. Mars Hill Church started off as a home Bible study. And in less than 20 years, it went to a 15-campus, 14,000-member megachurch in Seattle. He also helped to launch the Acts 29 church planting network, which remains in operation with many churches planted here in Chicago through the network. He helped launch the Gospel Coalition. He helped launch the Resurgence. And he wrote books about marriage and mission that were New York Times bestsellers. By most accounts, depending on who you talk to, he was among the most successful young evangelical pastors in America. His theology was unapologetically biblical. He did not apologize for the Bible. And he became proof that you could hold to the Bible and still reach skeptical young people in the most secular state in the United States. His style was confrontational and rough to a fault. He was known for speaking before thinking. And he was appealing at the time, we're talking, 15 years ago or so, 10 years ago, he was appealing exactly because he was a contrast to the softening that we saw in evangelical Christianity in the first part of the 21st century. And I actually liked him quite a bit back then. Now, he said some things that were not that great, but I liked him back then. He wasn't afraid to confront the drift of evangelicalism to the left. Here's a quote, and you're going to catch his style in this quote. So I'll show that quote up there. There's a strong drift towards the hard theological left. Some emergent types want to recast Jesus as a limp-wrist hippie in a dress with lots of product in his hair who drank decaf and made pithy Zen statements about life while shopping for the perfect pair of shoes. In Revelation, Jesus is a pride fighter with a tattoo down his leg, a sword in his hand, and the commitment to make someone bleed. That is a guy I can worship. I cannot worship the hippie, diaper, halo Christ because I cannot worship a guy I can beat up. Okay, that's a little over the top, but that is how Mark Driscoll communicated. But in 2014, everything came apart. He was accused by many people in his church, including elders, of abusive and overbearing leadership. He got caught paying over $200,000 to artificially boost one of his books to New York Times bestseller status. He has single-handedly become Mars Hill Church. He had become the Mars Hill brand. So it all came undone, and he resigned from the Acts 29 leadership earlier. He resigned from his church, and Mars Hill split up their locations and shut down as a church in January 2015. What happened? Among other things, Mark Driscoll had a shadow mission. We'll talk about shadow mission today. So last week we looked at life through death. Last week we looked at Jesus called to discipleship in Luke 9 that requires laying down your life. That requires death to a whole way of life. That was what Jesus was calling his disciples to. Jesus was clear in our text last week that his messiahship involved the cross, and that following him would mean real life, but it would also mean a cross for his followers. So the big idea last week was that you cannot and will not follow Jesus into that kind of life, into a thriving but kingdom-centered life that will involve suffering. You can't follow Jesus there if you're building your own rival kingdom. That was what I talked about last week. And at the end of that message, I looked at 3 common responses that Christians give to Jesus' call to lay down your life. 3 common responses that we give to the call to surrender. Number 1 is self-indulgence. It's a denial of discipleship altogether. I'm going to ignore the call of Jesus altogether, and I'm going to build my life with straw. I'm never going to experience a life of discipleship or self-denial. I'm going to actually throw away any prospects at real life. And I actually think that there are for people that respond to Jesus this way, some of them they're not saved. Another response is self-deception or a shadow mission. It's a divided heart that attempts to serve 2 masters and build 2 kingdoms and ends up accomplishing neither one. throwing away your full kingdom potential. And then the third response is self-denial. It's surrender. It's dying daily to yourself. And why do we have to die daily? Because sometimes, living sacrifices crawl off the altar, right? And sometimes we fail, but we get back up and we say, Jesus, here's my life. Jesus, will you take my life and use me as you say fit? Here I am, Lord, send me. It's dying to self for the great treasure of the kingdom and building your life with gold and silver and costly stones. And God uses your yielded life to actually make an eternal difference. So those are the three responses. I want to drill down into that phenomenon today, these different responses that we give to the call of Jesus. And so we're going to look at our text. Our text today is Luke 14, verses 25 through 33. We're going to look briefly at why we respond to the call of discipleship the way that we do. And I'm going to focus on the middle response, which is shadow mission, self-deception. Jesus is making the point in our text today that discipleship is costly. And I want to look at how and why we try to find ways around paying the price. We try to find ways around that costliness. So my basic thesis is this. You cannot thrive as a disciple of Jesus if you pursue a shadow mission. You cannot thrive as a disciple of Jesus if you pursue a shadow mission. Avoiding the cost of discipleship leads to a much greater cost of a divided heart and a squandered life. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I turned 54 this year. I mentioned this last Sunday. I still want to insist. I don't look a day over 53. But I turned 54 this year, and you get to a point where your children are adults, and a lot of decades are behind you. You don't want to wake up there saying, I wasted it all. Now here's the thing. Jesus is the God of second chances, and the day before you die, you can surrender to the Lord, and God can make something of it. But I'm just telling you, the more water under the bridge, the more critical it becomes to do this right, to use your life well. It's not like, when you get older, you're like, I'm going to retire now, I'm going to sit and just go fishing all the time. No, actually getting older is the time to actually invest more, because you've got more to invest. So sometimes you wake up and you have these very lucid realizations that decades have gone by. You don't want to squander your life. You only get one shot. Please hear me today. Please hear me. Whether you're 20 or 15 or 5 or 50 or 60 or 80, hear me today. You don't want to squander your life. Luke 14:25. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus. And turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And anyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundation and is not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Will he not first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he's not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and ask for terms of peace. In the same way, verse 33, in the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple. So here's the basic structure of the text. If you're taking notes, here's the basic structure of the text. Number one, Jesus was so popular that huge crowds followed him. Verse 25. Number two, in response to the huge crowds, Jesus says, unless they lose their lives, they can't be his disciples. Verses 26 to 27. Number three, he illustrates the idea of counting the cost of a great endeavor in a couple different ways. That's verses 28 through 32. And finally, he climaxes his exhortation by stating the cost in very plain terms. Following me will cost you everything. Everything. Verse 33. The problem, of course, is that we try to find ways around this. We theologize our way as denominations, as entire movements, or as individuals into finding a way to say, well, Jesus, he didn't really mean that. In the original Greek, he was saying, do you. That's what he was saying. we try to find ways around that. We look for low-cost alternatives to discipleship. And the question I want to look at today is why? Why do we try to avoid the cost? So let's go over the text and see if we can gain some insight into this puzzle. Luke 14:25, first half of the verse. It says, in the New American Standard Translation, which is the translation that your Pew Bible has, it says, now great multitudes were going along with him. Great multitudes were going along with him. So we see here that Jesus is very popular. Great multitudes are following him. The crowds, were actually traveling with him, the NIV says. They were traveling with him, which means they were actually putting some cost and some effort into this. They had to get food. They had to carry things. They had to have people cover for them on their shift at work. Did they have shifts in the first century? I don't know. They were walking. They weren't riding. They were walking. So time and effort and money and energy were going into traveling with Jesus. And we get some insight into this phenomenon in John chapter 6, verses 25 through 26. The crowds were following Jesus for what he could offer them. In this case, in John, it was for free lunch, right? And Jesus exhorts them in John to put their energy into something better than a free lunch. He says this, John 6:25, when they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you get here? And Jesus answered, very truly, I tell you, you're looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. So we see the problem is not that people are unwilling to pay a price. People will give everything they have if they think it can benefit them enough. Can I get an amen? People will give everything they have for their career, for example. They'll give everything they have to make sure their kids get into a good college, for example. They'll give everything they have. They'll go into hock up to their eyeballs to get that car they want. So people are willing to pay a price, right? The problem is what we value. The problem is that we value often the wrong things, and that's so ironic. So ironic to me. Look, what we saw last week is that God actually offers us more when he asks us to lay our lives down. When he asks you to give up your life, he offers you more than your life. He offers you more, okay? He offers us his life. He offers us real life. But when God offers us his life, that requires us letting go of our lives, okay? We have to let go of our agendas, our life. We have to let go of what we have in our hand. Last week I illustrated it like a little quarter or dime. You have this little coin in your hand, this little bitty silver coin, and you say, this is mine, precious, it's mine, right? And God walks up and he says, he puts his hand and he says, give that to me, and I'll hand you this blank check. It's everything I have, but you have to give me everything you have. And you're like, oh, it's so shiny though. I don't know if I can let this go. And so we forego what God wants to give us because we hold on to this little thing that we can see and we can touch. So we're afraid. We're afraid of that. We're afraid of laying our lives down. We're afraid of what it might cost us if we say, yes, Lord. And so for whatever reason, we often fail to grasp what it is we're actually being offered. So we go for what we can see and feel, which is temporary. Verse 25b, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother and his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. So this is how Jesus responds to his popularity. He responds to his popularity by laying out the cost of following him in the starkest of terms. Now you understand that Jesus is using hyperbole. I've literally heard Bible commentators say, well, the word for hate really means not hate. Well, no, that's the word he's using here. He's using hyperbole. He doesn't want you to hate people, okay? He's using hyperbole here. He wants the cost of following him crystal clear, no uncertain terms. This is what it means to follow me, to be my disciple. So Jesus is actually willing to drive away the adoring crowds. What does that tell you? He doesn't care if he's popular. He doesn't care about his brand. He doesn't care about his book deals. He doesn't care about his speaking circuit. He cares about people. In other words, we have a mission here, guys. Popularity be damned. And unfortunately for Mark Driscoll, that's the opposite of what Mark Driscoll did, and many, many, many other pastors around the country. His popularity began to consume him. his mission became him, to the point where he was willing to deceive in order to get his book sales boosted. He was willing to deceive people. He became willing to sell out in order to promote his books. So Mark Driscoll fell into a trap that all of us have the tendency to fall into, and certainly people in positions of influence, power, and that's a shadow mission. You know, Jesus had a shadow mission as well. He was tempted in a shadow mission, and his shadow mission was a crown without a cross. That's what the devil tempted with in Luke chapter 4, verses 5 through 7. He says, look, here's all the kingdoms of the world, and they can be yours right now. You don't have to go to the cross. You can have the kingdoms of the world now. All you got to do is worship me. And Jesus said, no, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And in Matthew 16:23, you know, Jesus says, I'm going to the cross. That's the parallel passage to the passage in Luke we covered last week. Jesus is like, I'm going to the cross. And Peter's like, Lord, this is never going to happen to you. And what does the Lord say to Peter? Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. So this idea of avoiding the cross was one of the temptations that Jesus faced. He had a shadow mission as well. However, because Jesus valued what is valuable, he did not give in to the temptation. He did not pursue his shadow mission. So what is a shadow mission, you ask? I'm so glad you asked what a shadow mission is. John Ortberg, years ago, was one of the pastors at Willow Creek. Now he pastors a church out in California. But he was at the Willow Creek Leadership Summit back in 2007, and he unpacked this term shadow mission in his talk at the summit. And here's a brief description. Put it up on the board there. A shadow mission. So it says, a mission is the highest purpose to which God calls us. So we all have a mission, right? The mission centers around the gospel. It's the highest purpose to which God calls us. A shadow mission is an authentic mission that has been derailed. This is on the back of John Ortberg's book. John Ortberg reminds us that every leader has a mission and a shadow mission. And he goes on and he says, Ortberg writes, part of what makes the shadow mission so tempting is that it's usually so closely related to our gifts and our passions. It's not 180 degrees off track. It is just 10 degrees off track, but that 10 degrees is in the direction of hell. Even Jesus had to battle a shadow mission. He wanted to be a leader without suffering, to be the Messiah without the cross. Ortberg writes, if we fail to embrace our true mission, we will live out our shadow mission. We will let our lives center around things that are unworthy and selfish and dark. Let that soak in for a second. So in his message, which if you want, it's on Vimeo. I'll send you the link if you want to watch it. It's a 45-minute message. It's dynamite. He talks about how he realized when he was a teenager that he was called to preach. And so he did. He would preach in various churches as a teenager. In other words, he discovered that his mission was preaching the gospel. He was a preacher, and he's been a pastor all his life. His mission was preaching, okay? But he soon discovered what his shadow mission was in the form of a headline in the local paper. The headline read, "Local Boy Wins Acclaim Preaching." So see how that works? His mission was preaching. His shadow mission was to win acclaim preaching. I'm going to say that one more time. His mission was preaching. His shadow mission was to win acclaim preaching. Nobody can tell the difference on the outside except you. On the outside, it looks exactly the same, whether you're pursuing your mission or your shadow mission. And this applies to everyone, not just people with influence. So basically, we all know what our real mission is, but pride or our propensity for dethroning God or having a divided heart or fear mean that we're always going to be tempted to pursue a shadow mission, which on the surface might look legitimate, may have a similar outward shape. You know how your shadow is the shape of you, but dark? Your shadow mission is the shape of your real mission, but it's centered around you yourself. It drains and siphons spiritual and emotional energy from your real mission. And we ourselves are ultimately at the center of our shadow mission. And it amounts to building our own kingdom in some way. So I have this exact same problem. I have a shadow mission. And I realized several years ago that I actually have two. One of them is more than 10 degrees off. One of them involves the farmhouse I showed you guys last week. It's the comfortable life that goes the way I want it to. A life that's just easy and rural and no parking problems and, a life built around me. But I have another one that I didn't tell you about last week, and my other shadow mission is to be seen as amazing. I want to be seen as an amazing husband, an amazing father, an amazing pastor, an amazing preacher. Man, wasn't that a great message? Yes, it was. And here's the thing. Should I want to be a great husband? Should I want to be a great father? Should I want to be a great pastor? So what's the problem? The problem is the mission to be seen that way. That's the shadow mission. The mission is to be a good husband. The shadow mission is to be seen as a good husband. See the difference? Being a good husband is about my wife. Being seen as a good husband is about me, right? If I do that, I'm no longer building the kingdom mission. I am doing a Steve Laughlin mission, building my kingdom. I'll give you an example. So all these right now, you see those cameras back there. These sermons are on YouTube, and I have literally sat on YouTube and been tempted to click repeat. Our sermons average between 25 and 45 views, generally speaking. A little bit less than viral, okay? And so I'm watching. I'm like, man, that was. I put my heart and soul into that. That's a great sermon. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to click repeat. And I'm sitting there with my thumb on my screen, ready to click repeat. And then I stop myself. I'm like, why do I want to do that for? Why do I want to artificially inflate my views? Isn't it the same thing Mark Driscoll did? Except without the $200,000. Maybe I can call friends. Hey guys, could you watch my video and click repeat and send it to your friends and do an artificial inflation of myself? And would this be with the hope of people hearing the gospel? No, it would be with the hope of people thinking Steve is cool. Now, Jeremy got 46 views. I got 70. So, when Jesus calls us to death, it's not that complicated. I mean, it may involve your actual death, but you're going to die anyway, so you might as well die well, right? But it can be as simple as dying to my need to be applauded. It can be as simple as embracing obscurity, that Steve Laughlin is never going to go viral. And not just being okay with that, being pleased with that. Death to self is as simple as embracing obscurity. I am really, really okay with being obscure. I'm joyful in being obscure. I'm okay if people don't ever hear of Steve Laughlin. Yeah, I've heard of him. If that's what I'm looking for, that's bad. Death to self is saying, I don't care if anybody's ever heard of me. What did Zinzendorf say? Preach the gospel, be unknown, and die. That was like his mission, right? So, my joy should come from making much of Jesus and not making much of me. I want to drill down into that a little. What drives us away from the cost and towards compromise of shadow mission? Verse 27. What drives us away from the cost and towards shadow mission? Anyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundation and is not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish. Suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Will he not first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? And if he's not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and ask for terms of peace. So Jesus is talking about great endeavors here. Building a tower, waging a war, and how the thoughtful person counts the cost before jumping in. They want to make sure they're really willing to go all the way and they have enough money to pay it, right? Remember from our text last week in Luke 9, I mentioned this last week, Jesus said, carrying your cross was a very graphic image in the first century. People had actually seen people crucified in the first century. So when Jesus says carry your cross, he's not talking about, well, life's going to be hard sometimes. Jesus is talking about people have actually seen people hanging on crosses. And you know how they got there? They actually carried their cross to the place of execution as part of their condemnation, and then they were killed on it. So when he says carry your cross, he's talking about something pretty graphic. A.W. Tozer has a great quote. This is the guy we're asking you to read for the 40 days. He says, the cross is the most revolutionary thing to ever appear among men. The cross of Roman times knew no compromise. It never made concessions. It won all its arguments by killing its opponent and silencing him for good. It spared not Christ, but slew him the same as the rest. He was alive when they hung him on that cross and completely dead when they took him off of it. That was the cross the first time it appeared in Christian history. With perfect knowledge of this, Christ said, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So the cross not only brought Christ's life to an end, but it also ends the first life, the old life of every one of his true followers. This and nothing less is true Christianity. We must do something about the cross, and there's only one of two things we can do. We can flee it or die upon it. And a shadow mission is the attempt to do neither. So Jesus had said some radical things in this passage. He said, hate your family, hate your life, and die. That's what he said. That's how you get popular. He says all of this to the crowd. The crowd included both disciples and unbelievers. So the fact that Jesus is saying this to unbelievers is a pretty amazing thing. He wasn't afraid to scare them away. He's not offering celebrity benefits. Hey, you get to hang out with me. I'm a celebrity, and you can be seen with me. He's not offering that, okay? He's not offering a quick fix. You got problems? I'll solve them all for you right now. He's not offering that. And he's not offering a get-out-of-hell-free card. Believe in me, and you'll die and go to heaven. I mean, that's true. If you call on the name of the Lord, you will be saved. But he's not offering a get-out-of-hell-free card. He's telling them that following him is going to cost them something. So in other words, he's not looking for a crowd. He's looking for worshipers who will follow him into a mission, a joyful but costly mission. And he wants this clear to this crowd in no uncertain terms. And so this is what he's saying to you today as well. Following Jesus will cost you. He's saying this to you. It's not a quick fix. It's not a get-out-of-hell card. Following Jesus, being a faithful Christian will cost you. It will cost you your agenda. It will cost you your self-aggrandizement. It will cost you everything that you know for the life that you want to build for yourself. That's a whole way of life he's asking you to die to. He's asking you to die to the American way of life. You know what I think? I think everybody wants their life to count. That's what I think. I believe that everybody in this room, and everybody in this city, and everybody on this planet, they want their life to count for something. I believe that. But I also think we're afraid of that. Because we know that if our life counts, that's going to cost us something. You can play it safe and watch TV the rest of your life, and your life won't count, but you stay safe. But the cost is bigger in the end. You know that, right? Reminds me of drag racing. I used to have a hot rod. I didn't bring a picture this time, but I had this orange and black 1970 Camaro LT1, 375 horsepower, 350, turbo 350 trans. It was a bad boy. Put a lot of money in that car. And I used to drag race it. Well, confession, I used to drag race it on Clybourne. But they would turn the hydrants on, and then we had to go over to Elston and drag race over there. But I also drag raced it at Great Lakes Dragway in Union Grove, Wisconsin. We used to go up there. I was in a car club, and for $12, you could do grudge matches, and you could race all day for $12. So me and my buddies would go up there. We'd take station wagons, pickup trucks, whatever we'd race them up there, right? But I had my Camaro, and it was just a hoot. It ran like 13 seconds in a quarter mile. It was a bad boy, and so I'd race this thing. And it was like behind the wheel, the adrenaline is amazing. It feels awesome to be the driver, right? And then my brother-in-law said, hey, can I drive? I'm like, whoa. He's a professional driver. But I'm like, okay. And I sat in the passenger seat. And let me tell you, sitting in the passenger seat was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. And why was it terrifying? Because I wasn't in the driver's seat. I didn't trust the driver. And that's how it is with our lives, you know. Jesus is not your co-pilot, ladies and gentlemen. If he's the co-pilot, you're in the wrong seat. Get in the back seat, okay? Do something besides. Like Jesus is the pilot and the owner of the airplane, okay? And he owns the airline too, and the airport, and the world, okay? So he's not your co-pilot. But the problem is when we switch seats, we don't really trust the driver, right? We don't really trust the driver, and that's what we're afraid of. And that's why, even though we want our lives to count, we're afraid to lay them down, because what's he going to do with it when I give it to him? Oh, he's going to make me go live in a hut somewhere. That's what he's going to do, right? That's what we're afraid of. Again, our responses. Number 1, self-indulgence. Number 2, self-deception, shadow mission. Number 3, self-denial, surrender. We have these different responses. So, a lot of us, Christians and churches all across America, we enter the half-life of a shadow mission because we're afraid of going all the way. And we're afraid of going all the way to self-indulgence because we know that's bad. And we're afraid of going all the way to Jesus because we know that's scary. Right? So we stay in this mushy middle. We know that this is a costly choice. If I self-indulge, I'll wreck my life. But if I go all the way with Jesus, I don't know what he's going to do. Right? So we go to this mushy middle in an attempt to avoid costly choices. But the mushy middle, the shadow mission, is costly as well, ladies and gentlemen. Shadow mission means that you are never giving your whole self to anything. A shadow mission means you are never giving your whole self to anything, which counterintuitively results in you get the liabilities without the benefits. It still costs you something. It still costs you a lot. What do I mean? You don't get the temporary buzz that comes from self-indulgence. When you indulge yourself, you might have a nice house and a nice car and a nice this and a nice that. And so that gives you, by temporary, I mean, a few decades. You don't get the temporary buzz of self-indulgence, but you also don't get the abiding peace and the abiding joy that comes from self-denial. So you live there in the middle somewhere, accomplishing nothing. It actually takes more energy and yields fewer rewards, whether they're real or perceived rewards, than going all the way either with yourself or with Jesus. So here's some advice. Do something all the way. Do something all the way. Don't sit in the middle on the fence. Get on one side of the fence or the other. Get out there and party and sleep in on Sundays or follow Jesus all the way. Don't play the game. Just stop. Considering the cost means that you're attempting to understand the value of the endeavor and whether it's worth the price. So you're thinking about building this tower. Is it really worth the price to build that tower? And do I really have the money? Right? So just like for us, choose, believer, I'm calling on you believers, choose today to educate yourself on what it is that Jesus is calling you to. Again, Matthew 13:44, the kingdom is like a treasure in the field. So this man's walking through the field and he stumbles across a treasure chest of untold wealth. And in his joy, he covers it up and he runs and he sells everything he has because he knows that what he found is worth, it exceeds by far the value of all of his possessions. That's what Jesus is describing here. Educate yourself on what Jesus is calling you to. Educate yourself on what it means to be part of the kingdom. Sometimes if only I could get my head around, if only we could get our head around, what does it mean to be a child of the King? What does it mean to be a child of the King? We just sang it. Soon and very soon, we're going to see the King. What does it mean to be a child of the King? What does it mean? Luke 12:32, do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you what? The kingdom, the whole kingdom. He's handing you a blank check. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, your heart is also. What if we understood that our dad is the king, and no matter what I give away, there's lots more to come? If my father was actually the king and somebody needed shoes, you think I'd be safe if I gave him my shoes? You think I could find another pair? If my father was the king and somebody needed clothes or food or anything else, you think I'd be okay if I gave that away? Because my father's got plenty more where that came from. So do you understand that when you get that your father's the king, that's not, when you go to the prosperity gospel churches, they act like all that treasure's for you. And it's not. It's to give away. It's to give away. And you know what? Maybe you don't have extra shoes or clothes, but you can give away yourself. You can give away your time. You can invest in this community, in this church, in these children, in somebody somewhere. You can pour your life out. And you know what? You won't regret it. Pour your life out. Invest what God has given you. Stop holding on to it like there's no more left. Stop holding on to it like if I give it away, God's going to run out. If you do the math and you realize that you cannot lose, then verse 33 is a no-brainer. As they used to say, biggest no-brainer in the history of earth. In the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple. So I pretty much covered this last week, but I'll do a brief review. Why does Jesus ask this much? He asks this much because we can't run in two directions at one time. We cannot serve two masters, and we cannot build two kingdoms. So the Greek literally reads, every one of you who does not say farewell to all of his possessions. If you're a slave of Christ, you own nothing. If you're a slave of Christ, you own nothing. When you own nothing, you have nothing to lose. Amen? If you have nothing to lose, you're free. Nobody can hold those things against you. So I'm going to go through that again. If you're a slave of Christ, you own nothing. If you own nothing, you have nothing to lose. If you have nothing to lose, you're free. You are available to the master to do whatever he says to do, to go wherever he says to go, to give whatever he says to give. You're free because there's plenty more where it came from. And Jesus is not talking, he's not saying you got to go live on the street in a box and wear a sandwich board and say, repent for the end is near. That's not what he's saying to do, okay? I mean, maybe for some of us. He's simply asking us to claim ownership of nothing. We cannot claim ownership. You cannot claim ownership of your goods, your possessions, your house, your reputation, your relationships, your gifts, your calling, your self-esteem, your ministry, or even your very life. You cannot claim ownership of your life. And any attempt to own those things after you become Christ's, those are shadow missions. But you know what's awesome? When your hands are empty, you can receive what God has to give you. Whether it's power or mission or suffering or anything else, God can give you what he has when your hands are empty. That's the awesome thing about empty hands. And you know what else is awesome? Is that you can actually enjoy the things God gives you. Maybe God gives you a nice house. Maybe he gives you a widescreen TV. Maybe he gives you a relatively comfortable life. And when that is given back to God, when that doesn't belong to you, you're not afraid about it anymore. Okay? So you can actually enjoy God's gifts when they aren't yours. Somebody takes that nice 1970 Camaro, that's okay. God's got another one. Then you're not worried about your alarms and all the rest of these, my possessions. I don't want anybody to touch my iPhone 11, or whatever, right? No, when nothing belongs to you, take it. Who cares? When you surrender to the Lord who loves you, you literally cannot lose. You cannot lose. You cannot lose. So here's my question. What is holding you back? What is holding you back? Some applications, and I'll let you go. Number 1, meditate on the value of the kingdom Jesus has given you, believer. Or if you are not yet a believer, meditate on the value of the kingdom Jesus is calling you to. Is that little life you have really worth it? Number 2, let me go back to number 1. Ask the Lord to help you see. I get it. I live on this planet too, and there's lots of shiny things around us, right? And sometimes we can't see through those shiny things to the actual value of what God's offering us. So ask him to help you. Just ask him to help you. Lord, help me see. Number 2, look at those 3 responses: self-indulgence, self-deception, self-denial. And identify which one best describes you. Lord, which one is me? Which one am I? Let me be honest with myself, Lord. Which one of those am I doing? Number 3, if you have not yet surrendered as Jesus has called you to surrender, identify what is holding you back. Is it really that car, or is it that relationship? Like what's holding me back, Lord, from real life? Identify what's holding you back. Do you struggle to trust the Father? That might be holding you back. If you had a dad that was abusive, you tend to project that on God, right? If you had a dad that was mean or whatever, we project those things on God. So maybe that's holding you back. Maybe you just don't feel like you can trust God. Okay, identify that. Are you afraid of temporal loss? Are you afraid that if you say, Lord, here I am, I'm going all the way, he's going to take away that television. He's going to take away that car. He's going to take away that nice house. Is that what you're afraid of? Are there possessions or dreams or relationships that actually possess you? Are you the one who is possessed by your possessions? Do they own you? Name the problem. Name your shadow mission. It took me a while. When I first heard Ortberg's sermon, that was 2007. I bet it was 2 years even, before I could actually name my shadow mission. I was so blind to it. Ask other people around you to help you. Ask the Lord to help you. Name your shadow mission. Name what's holding you back. Number 4, surrender. Take the white flag and wave it. Say, Lord, I'm not going to fight you anymore. Now, you're going to have to do it again. You're going to have to surrender probably in half an hour and 45 minutes and in 3 hours and in 12 hours and 24 hours. That's kind of how this works. It's a relationship. And so you're surrendering to the Lord on a regular basis because, Paul's analogy, living sacrifices in Romans 12, that was a very radical image, by the way. I'm going to throw this in for free. People were used to dead sacrifices. So you take the dead animal, right, and you throw it up on the altar and it just starts to cook, right? But living sacrifices got to keep themselves on the altar. And sometimes they crawl off, and then you got to crawl back up there again. Surrender, think of surrender as a discipline. I'm going to daily take up my cross. I'm going to daily lay down my life. I'm going to daily say, Jesus, here I am. Lord, here I am. Take my life. Lord, use me. Lord, I'm available to you. Lord, I don't want to hold this back anymore. Lord, I don't want to hold on to my little quarter and think this is real life. Lord, here I am. I am yours. Jump into the arms of the Father and go on the adventure of real discipleship. It's not safe, but it's good. Actually, it is very safe. It's just not safe in temporal terms. The Lord loves you. The Lord loves us. He's not calling you to anything nasty. He's going to call you to some suffering. He's going to call you to some pain, but he's going to call you to joy. And he's going to call you to purpose. And he's going to call you to real life. So church, will you surrender? Let's pray. Lord, you know the arguments I've had with you about this. You know the many times that I have laid my life in your hands only to pull it back out again. You know the many times I've taken this dream or that possession or this person and said, Lord, it's yours, only to go back on my promise, Lord. But Lord, that is the life of discipleship, of realizing that it's worth it. It's worth it. You're worth it. The kingdom is worth it. To say, Lord, here's my life. Use me as you please. I'll go where you say to go. I'll do what you say to do. Lord, I pray that you would stir in us such a spirit that we would yield our lives to you and be available to you 100%. Lord, for the one who has not yet called on the name of the Lord to be saved, the one who has not yet been made alive by the Spirit, show them what you're calling them to. Show them that there's a Savior who has died on their behalf, and their sins can be forgiven, and they can become part of your kingdom, Lord. They can be a child of the King. Lord, for the Christian who's just afraid, help them see that fear is a lousy way to live. Lord, I pray that we would yield ourselves to a loving Father who will do more than we ask or imagine. In Jesus' name, amen.